make it make sense to put into a lease, it's a negotiation. So, anything that's of value to you, you should make sure it is part of your lease agreement because.
Hello, good morning. Welcome back to the Dave Kittle Show. Today we have Elliot Dennis on the pod, Dennis Healthcare. And Elliot reached out to me, I don't know, maybe a couple months ago, and was looking if we needed help with some potential real estate square footage and what we're looking for. And I actually was, we're going through some due diligence, and obviously we can't mention names or anything like that, but Elliot reached out, provided a ton of help. Got me some local comps in those buildings, other buildings nearby, ton of value. So I wanted to get him on here because we've talked a bunch of times already, and he's helped me a ton behind the scenes. Elliot, good morning.
Good morning, Dave. How are you?
I'm feeling great. So today, before I want to have you introduce yourself, but we're going to cover what you're seeing out there, specifically in the New York City area, and then also letting folks know if you are doing any other metros or areas. But I know that you guys at Dennis Healthcare, you guys focus just on healthcare, which is awesome. When you reached out, it certainly felt that way, and you knew a lot, and you gave me some like anonymous case studies around other physicians and physical therapists and chiropractors that you had helped, and other deals and things. So I want to review today, like, what are you seeing out there? Any trends? New York City is kind of unique. I know there's a lot of open space and unoccupied offices and buildings, which I think most likely helps us and gives leverage to us. You're on the tenant side, so you only represent tenants that are healthcare providers, healthcare practices, which is awesome. I also want to ask you things like what are some of the issues or the challenges that you see with healthcare providers out there. Maybe they're, like, we don't want to get screwed. We don't want to sign anything that like puts our nose over our skis or anything like that. So I want to go through all that. But before we get into it, just give the folks a little bit of a background, a little bit of a bio about yourself, why you started Dennis Healthcare.
Sure. Yeah. So like you said, Elliot Dennis, I'm founder and principal broker of Dennis Healthcare. And the firm was founded as the only firm in New York City, based in New York City, homegrown in New York City, that only represents healthcare tenants and purchasers. And really, the value proposition there is as it sounds. It's fully aligning ourselves with our clients, and it's a new firm. We've only been around for about 4 months at this point, and the genesis of the firm is I spent 5 years just about representing healthcare owners and some tenants, but mostly ownership work, working for landlords, working for sellers at my previous firm. And during my 5 years there, basically what I saw was a real dearth in tenant advocates solely aligned with the tenants who had healthcare experience. So that's why I founded the firm. We have over $250 million of transaction experience. We've worked with everyone from the hospital systems to, private practice of one physician to ambulatory surgery centers, MRI imaging facilities, you name it, we've touched the specialty, and obviously physical therapy as well. New York City is the biggest commercial real estate market in the world. And, I think healthcare is extremely nuanced in the commercial real estate space, and you really need an expert. So we're looking to fill that void.
I want to look through the timeline when you reached out, because I feel like you reached out maybe at least 2 or 3 months ago. So I was in the first maybe month or so of your cold outreach. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And, brokerage it's an old school business, and something I love about it. It's kind of block and tackle, make your calls, send your emails, and sort of have a method to your madness. And ours is, I can be very confident when I send those emails and make those calls that I understand the specialty that I'm speaking to. And, when I called you, Dave, I knew exactly what you did. I knew the specialty. And as you nicely touched on, I think that provided some value off the bat to try and start the conversation. That's how we do it. People say it doesn't work, but it does work. And we've been fortunate to see a lot of traction thus far, and already working with some great clients.
I just looked up my email. So you reached out, cold email on April 1st. Not a joke. It was a serious No, it's not April Fool's. And it only took two cold emails from you for me to respond because I don't know, it felt different. Obviously, it felt genuine. You were touching on things that obviously are important to your target client because you know your target client well. But anyway, enough of that. So you reached out. We were talking about, comparables. The deal either stalled or kind of fell through at this point, but we were looking at a deal where there were a couple practice locations in the New York City area, an area that you know very well. And one of the locations had like a few years left on the lease, and that was maybe part of one of the reasons, but multiple reasons as to why this particular owner was looking to exit. I mentioned that to you. I think the next day or the next business day or a couple of days later, you had comparables for me in that building and nearby, which was very helpful because it gave us some understanding of like, all right, what are our options, right? That's really like, we're also trying to like manage our team and our staff, and we're doing marketing and we're getting new patients. And so that's why it helps to have you and lean on what you guys do. So helping understand what's the comps in that actual building and then also nearby. And maybe it doesn't always happen like this, but it seemed like all the comparables were like better than that lease because that lease was, I think, signed in 2019 before the world changed. So, basically it's the pros and cons of that is like, well, would we stay in that actual location? If we acquired the practice, would we stay in that location, sign a new lease, but then it's like, well, it's already above market rate for right now. Anyway, those are some of the things that like immediately were helping us. What are some of the other things that you see out there in terms of either, trends, occupancy is it plateaued? Is it still climbing in New York City or elsewhere?
Sure. Well, one of the things that we do, obviously, spoke about the value proposition, but we take a lot of pride in information. I think, brokerage is an information business, and we gather the information and we give it to our clients, and we also share it with our prospects. And candidly, I probably share too much, but I share it with the community too, because I think it's important for everyone to be informed. And, to answer your question, we gather our own database, which tracks buildings that are tenanted by healthcare folks. And that means that there's healthcare in the building and that the owner wants healthcare moving forward. And, an anecdote to that is like One World Trade Center. They have Princeton Longevity Center in that building. Okay. But One World Trade is not doing any more healthcare leases. That's a one-off. So One World Trade Center is out of our database. It's not part of our data set. And then you've got a building, let's say, because we're talking physical therapy, there's a pretty decent presence in a building like 515 Madison. That building, they are open to healthcare. I've had many conversations with their brokerage team about all sorts of different types of uses. So that building stays in the bucket. And we track our statistics in those specific buildings. Our database is very robust, south of 110th Street all the way through Manhattan, at any given time. And it fluctuates because we track it every day. There's about 630 buildings, give or take, that have healthcare tenants. And, I like to say are open for healthcare business. Those buildings have about a 17.9% vacancy rate. The average asking rent is $61 this morning. And that fluctuates again pretty much weekly. So, information is the biggest piece for everyone. And it's staying informed as a tenant, and especially a healthcare tenant, because you don't, I've spoken to very few except, institutional hospital systems really, and maybe some ambulatory surgery center providers who have a real estate team. Your providers, your physicians, you're dealing with your patients. You're not real estate folks. And that's sort of where we slide in, and it can be helpful and be that source of information.
That's awesome. So when you say that you share some of this with your community, is that through the newsletter you do, or do you also post that on LinkedIn too, publicly?
Yeah. So we send the newsletter out every Monday. There's brokerage folks, there's owners, and obviously a lot of physicians and providers. And then we also post that on LinkedIn, goes out to our whole community. And that's, you name the specialty. our LinkedIn network. My LinkedIn network is linked to it. And yeah, it's been rewarding to see that, the information is valued and the folks, whether they're signing a lease tomorrow or they're contemplating one in 5 years, it's equally valuable to them. And I've had a lot of positive conversations from it.
Yeah. And I don't want this to sound like a commercial. I invited you on here. Obviously, you are not, there's no paid placement. You didn't pay to come on here. So what are some of the challenges you might have seen with practice owners going about this on their own? Like, is there typically like if you didn't contact me, like maybe some other, healthcare based, brokerage would have contacted us, but like, we've been in the mobile space doing home visits and on-demand visits in New York City for years. And so I have not really been in the brick and mortar, tenant lease agreement space.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen some landlord biased or landlord weighted lease agreements where they have like either a standard template or something that they'll just give to healthcare providers when they're looking for a lease? And
yes,
if they don't know any better, they're going to just sign it. Like whether it's X amount of dollars for the security deposit, or maybe borderline egregious terms that like you'll immediately knock out if you reviewed the lease. But if you didn't, like some providers might just sign it.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that all the time. And, first and foremost, landlords are partners. They're not the enemy. They're your partner in this transaction. If you do well, they do well. It's a partnership. And, I take a lot of pride in having good relationships with everyone, especially the owners who, we're negotiating with as advocates for the tenants. But yeah, I mean, to give you an anecdote, I mean, what you see a lot and what we were discussing with your potential transaction is on renewals. Again, busy practice, Mr. Landlord comes up and you've got a renewal in a year and here's the piece of paper and sign it. And there's simple things in there that are cost savings. One of the biggest things is resetting your tax base year, which, I don't have to get too granular, but that's a big cost savings that I don't even candidly think that, a lot of providers know what that means, but we do. And it's a simple market provision that we can put in there. A really recent anecdote is I had a tenant downtown. It was a pain management practice, and he was looking to either renew or relocate. And his current building wanted him to sign a lease in which he was personally guaranteeing the entire lease. That's not market. That's very, very seldom seen. So, those are just two little pieces. I could go on and probably bore you, but the biggest thing is they save money and they're worth the time. And, and as far as sort of where we come in and what I think gets lost in translation is whether you use us or you don't use us, we collect our fee from the owner. So we are saving you money, and not charging you directly. So I think that's just helpful. It's helpful. Again, it's information. We're providing information, and it's at no cost to the tenant, to the provider. Because I know, listen, physicians are being sold things all day, every day. So I understand sort of that pain point, but I think we kind of check a nice little box where we're selling information in the sense, but we're not collecting a fee.
Yeah, that makes sense. About personal guarantees, we had a deal pause for multiple reasons down in Tampa, Florida, and it was a multi-site physical therapy practice. And that owner said in the process of early conversations, they said that they had personally guaranteed all of the lease agreements. Even if they sell to us, we would probably have to sign as well, but that he's still on the hook. Like the PG doesn't transfer to the buyers. He still remains on the PG, even if he's sold. And so specifically, they were like really considerate. They're like, we're absolutely not selling to any private equity backed company. Like we're not selling to anyone that's going to like come in and like gut a bunch of positions or change the culture morale, because they would apparently be still on the hook. as well as the new buyers. So they were saying like, we have to really, really trust and know the buyers. I mean, that sounds crazy. Cause then like, I mean, we're looking to buy and hold, but like, let's just say if we sold in 10 years, like, so then we're still going to be on the hook for the PG, even if some other buyer buys that. Does that sound at a high level? Does that sound like a bad deal or something that like doesn't make sense or not common?
Well, there are lease provisions in terms of the M&A piece of the business. And again, when you use an expert, also, an attorney, when you're going through your lease draft, obviously, of course, we should all be catching that, which is that you have the flexibility, if that's in your futures, that's in your practice's future, to be very cognizant of, okay, what does my lease say if this entity gets sold? Does the entity that's purchasing it have to be of an equal value? If there's a personal guarantee, does the personal guarantee transfer automatically, or does the personal guarantee only transfer if the new guarantor has an equal net worth, for example? Those are provisions that are in, most leases, and you need to be cognizant of if you're thinking that that's in your practice's future. And you can flag that and you can negotiate that. Leases are not cookie cutter agreements. Kind of joke around sometimes, like, when I'm speaking with my clients and my colleagues, like, if you've got a thought, we can try and deconstruct it and then make it make sense to put into a lease. It's a negotiation. So, anything that's of value to you, you should make sure it is part of your lease agreement, because, at the end of the day, after people, it's likely your largest expense.
Gotcha. I understand the net worth piece of that, but as a tenant and a healthcare provider, entrepreneur in the M&A space, but not a landlord, it seems like a tenant should never sign the PG that doesn't transfer upon change of ownership or, change of majority ownership. Is that something that I need to email you separately? Like, Elliot, for any of these deals, like, obviously we're looking to buy and hold, but I need the lease agreement to say, like, I don't even want to talk to any of your landlords unless they're okay with that. Because what happened, like, for example, I get hit by a bus and my wife wants to, sell the practice if we own majority control. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't want her stuck with that PG over her head, as well as the new buyers. And if my partners or her know the buyers, and so many things could go wrong with that. So is that something that like is a negotiation point with some landlords, or is that commonplace that it's usually going to be there because of that net worth piece? Like, assuming like if the buyers did not have a net worth that would actually satisfy the landlord's agreement to that, or even if it doesn't satisfy, I don't know, like the bank covenants that are signed by the landlord in terms of the buyers and not the buyer, the buyers of that lease agreement in that practice.
Right. I mean, it's nuanced, right? It's building to building, market to market. In New York City, it's not, I would say it is not market for a commercial lease to be personally guaranteed all the way through. There's what's called a good guy guarantee, which is absolutely market, which is essentially a limited personal guarantee. And there are all sorts of scenarios that I would ramble on and on about, but overarching, like I said, and like many brokers could tell you, whether they're in healthcare or especially, my office leasing colleagues, like there are horror stories where you're, going through an acquisition as a tenant and it's very exciting and hopefully very lucrative. And then they get to due diligence and they look at your lease and all of a sudden the landlord has to approve your acquisition. And it's exactly, but that's, when you don't do your due diligence in the lease. So it's just important to do that. And, listen, the lease term in New York City, it's 7 to 10 years, really 10 to 15 on the healthcare front. So it doesn't come up every year for every tenant, but you should pre-plan and have a meeting with a tenant broker, once every year, just to kind of right size what you have, get a lease abstract and understand what you have so you're prepared.
Love it. What else? Any other thoughts, considerations observations you're seeing out in the market.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, well, I would say, in the market overall, it's interesting to see there is office leasing doing a lot better than it has been since COVID, especially in sort of the trophy assets, the Class A market, if you will, Park Avenue. And what that means for healthcare is it's all tied in. So once that space gets constrained on Park Avenue, which it is, those office tenants then are going to expand east and west to the ancillary avenues. And that then starts limiting where healthcare tenants can go. I was having a conversation at a networking event 2 weeks ago with an office broker, and he basically said, hey, I've got a couple buildings on Broadway on the avenue in the 50s into the 40s. And you talked to me a year ago, we would have considered healthcare. You talk to me now, office is back. It's doing a lot better. We'd rather just have an office tenant, which I don't blame them. It's office tenant is a lot more straightforward, not as much traffic. Patient traffic tends to sort of be a pain point for owners in general in New York. So it's tightening a little bit, but physical therapy in particular, there are a lot of physical therapists mid-block in the Flatiron and Madison Square Park, in the 20s, 5th, 6th, 7th, into sort of Park and Lex. That space is still generally available, and when I speak with tenants in that market, it's a lot about what we talked about earlier, evaluating a renewal, evaluating if relocation makes sense. And then if they do have a renewal coming up, making sure that, they are with the market now, because your lease naturally is going to escalate. Sometimes those numbers are a lot higher at the end of the lease, not sometimes, always a lot higher at the end of the lease than they otherwise would be. And especially in this market, since it has been down since COVID, they want to make sure they're getting the right deal. And that's part of the information piece. And, what we spoke about, providing you with information and seeing that you've got options. And that's another big thing is options. If you're facing a renewal and you love your building, that's great. But go find 2 or 3 options in the market and, have other horses in the race, because your owner should know that you're looking elsewhere. That creates leverage and it gives you more information to make the best decision.
What are some, whether you do it and you help the tenant or the tenant is doing it, what's the best way right there to create some leverage? So you got a lease renewal coming up in the next, year or two, and the tenant is verbalizing or emailing some of this to the landlord. What are some leverage points? Like, hey, I had this renewal coming up. We love the building. We love the location. Patients, clients love it. It's convenient for them. It's near, main subways, all of that. Whatever, amenities, and it's clean and all that type of thing, brush their ego a little bit, maybe, whatever. But then say to the landlord, we're also looking at this intersection or this building and this building, and this is their square footage, and this is what we're looking at. Is it as simple as that? Just to drop an email or something like that? Or how do you, it's almost like you're pre-negotiating before you're even there.
Yeah.
Is that a professional way? Is that an appropriate way to start to work on
It's
some?
certainly appropriate. Your renewal generally has a notice period for it. And that notice period could be any number of months. I think a fair notice period is between 1 to 2 years for, depending on the size of the practice in your installation. Because you're going to need the better part of a year to be comfortable when you're looking for a new location. The best way that I would say to do it is, again, we just like to use tangible examples. I'll go back to this most recent renewal we're working on downtown. The pain management doctor could not get his landlord to engage with him. And, the landlord started to engage with him when we provided the information that was needed. Then all of a sudden they came to the table.
Isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, when they came to the table, when we provided the tenant with, hey, X building down the street is asking, why, and they're willing to provide a full installation. And, oh, by the way, here's another option that is also willing to do that. We love the building. We'd like to stay, but the terms of our renewal are really not aligned. What can we do? And lo and behold, all of a sudden they were picking up their phones and answering their emails. So it's gathering the information, and then approaching the landlord then, you know, and candidly, having representation is going to give you more credibility as a tenant. A landlord is, understands when someone's represented and not, and what that means. What that means is one tenant has more information than the other.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So if it weren't for you guys or, any brokerage or the information source for that tenant, that landlord may have never replied.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They may have never replied. And kind of like we were speaking about in terms of, representation before we got on this call, is I tell all of the tenants I work with, like, whether it's me or someone else, you should have one. Because, this is what we do every day. And, you name the comparison. And like I said, the easiest one is for dental. Like, when I go get my dental work and I sit in the chair, I don't tell the dentist how to do a root canal. That would be ridiculous. And it's sort of the same way with brokerage. Like, we're there to be the expert and provide you information and do the service. And that just gives you more credibility, and it's an easier conversation. If you've got an experienced representative, they probably know the landlord. They know how to speak with them. They know, who the folks are inside. They know the status of the building. They know the status of the debt on the building and sort of the financial situation. And that's all. It's all information that you need and information we can provide. But yeah, it's being armed with, again, I sound like a broken record, but the information.
Yeah. We kind of gloss over, but I just want to ask again. So like, what are you seeing in the New York City area in regards to like overall commercial occupancy compared to like 2018, 2019? Are we still like, it seems like, are there still a lot of open spaces? Like I know one of the in-house counselors for KPMG, huge company, consulting company, multi-billion-dollar company, and they were going from like 2 floors to 1 floor, or from 2 floors to like a half a floor. And I think they're moving out in the near future, if they haven't already, which would be a huge gap that like that landlord's you're not going to just find like another KPMG like easily to come fill up that whole space, right? So are you still seeing a big wide open occupancy compared to pre-COVID levels, or is New York City like close to pre-COVID levels?
It's getting there. It's definitely not there, but it's getting there. And again, it really is submarket to submarket. If you're playing if you're a trophy asset landlord, Class A, you're courting, you own the newest, nicest, shiniest toy in New York City, you probably have tenants lining up to see your space.
Like Hudson Yards.
Exactly. Like Hudson Yards, but more specifically, Park Avenue, north of Grand Central, and the Grand Central area with, if there's any new construction, for instance, One Vanderbilt, I mean, that is the biggest success story you could think of. You're really, it's extremely competitive. But if you're Class B, Class C, mid-block building in the Garment District, or, again, it's really asset to asset, but in, Flatiron or Nomad, and, you don't have amenities, you don't have an updated lobby, you don't have a large concession package you can offer, maybe because of the situation with your financing in the building, you're struggling, and, it's tricky for you. So it's changing. There's still a ton of opportunity for tenants throughout the city, but you've got to really take it building by building and submarket by submarket.
Without mentioning any names, do you have either a list in your head, like, who the great landlord, the tenant favored landlords, the ones that understand the healthcare tenants, they understand, like, or they're more amenable or flexible, or they're less rigid, or what? Like, do you have, again, without mentioning any names, like, is that something that you've seen where there's like a wide array of landlords out there, some that are maybe, I don't know, old school or rigid or whatever. And then there's others that are looking to fill the spaces. They're looking to play the game. They're looking to be flexible and amenable to maybe new tenants that are, younger professionals, or they're just looking to fill up the space instead of not answering emails or whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. 100% there are owners who are more amenable to healthcare and more experienced in healthcare. I think when you're a tenant, you need to toe that line and understand which one is which, right? There's an owner who's amenable to healthcare and would love to have healthcare in a building, but do they understand how many patients are coming in and out of their building every day if you're a high volume physical therapy practice? Do they have the elevators to be able to service that kind of traffic? It's one thing to say, we'll take healthcare. We'd love for healthcare to be in our building because we can't win any office business, so let's do healthcare. It's another thing to have a building that can actually service the healthcare and doesn't put you, the physical therapist in this example, in a bad position when you sign a lease and you're having a bustling practice and you are extremely successful, and all of a sudden your owner is very upset with you that you are clogging up their elevators and causing a nuisance for the rest of the building. So you need a combination of amenable to healthcare and understanding healthcare. And to answer your question succinctly, there are owners that are on my short list and they do an amazing job, and I'm always comfortable putting a tenant into that building. And if I don't know the owner of a building that we are evaluating, you're going to be damn sure that we're going to get to know them quickly and ask the questions that they probably haven't thought of because they generally don't have healthcare in the building. So yes, there are, and yes, we know them, and tenants should know them as well, because, you can get a great deal, right? Get a great deal in a mid-block building, let's say just in the garment center, for instance, which I've seen, but the building, it cannot service healthcare, and it's going to hurt your business in the long run. So it's dollars and cents, but it's also the functionality of the building.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, the elevator thing, I was just thinking, because I've done a lot of home visits. So in terms of the actual residential buildings, I've been in a ton of residential buildings, and of course I've been in some of the commercial buildings. And it's interesting, even the speed and the efficiency of the elevators are different. I know a lot of the elevators are like that old, like Otis, like that old company, OTIS, that's been around for 100 years or whatever. But it is fascinating that even the speed of the elevators are different in different buildings. But I guess that makes sense why Spear and other high volume clinics are typically the street level, without a little ramp maybe, but there's no elevator. And then a lot of the one-on-one, out of network and boutique physical therapy practices are the ones that are typically on the second floor or above in an elevator.
Sure. I mean, it's two pieces, right? The Spears of the world can afford that retail rent, and maybe the one-off practice that's just starting can't. And then to your point, the Spear, just because, you mentioned them, they obviously have a very clear model. I mean, I'm not going to speak for them, but I'm sure that it's valuable to them to control the process with their patient from the moment that they enter their center. So, that's something to be cognizant of as a tenant, right? If you have the means to lease or retail, and that's very important to you, then that's something you should consider. If not, you should consider, okay, when I walk into this building, for instance, who is the security guard? Is the security guard, is he clearly professional? Is he paying attention? Is he sleeping? It sounds silly, but as a broker, I notice those things, because if he's sleeping, guess what? It's probably something that's not important to the owner, and that's going to trickle down to the tenant. Do you need to buzz your patients into the door if there is no doorman? And then how does that system work? Are you in control of that? Does it work well? Can you integrate it with your cell phone, for instance? So if you're treating a patient, you get a buzz, you can just click it, or do you need to now staff someone at the front desk to do that? These are all little granular things that apply to healthcare more so than others because of the patient experience.
That's a great point. I've been in a building where I was visiting someone and they said, make sure you have the security guard is going to ask for your photo ID upon entering, just a heads up. I'm I'm like, all right, great. So I go, and they were busy with a few visitors or whatever. And I just walked in and, I'm just like, well, I'm not going to wait in line, right? I mean, in New York City, I'm going to just beeline it to the elevators. And if they stop me, they stop me. If they don't, they don't. And they didn't. And what's interesting, then the next time I came back to that building, there was no one there in front of the desk. And then they did stop me. I was walking by again. They did stop me to ask for my photo ID. So it is interesting. I never made that correlation of like, even that could have, if that's the landlord and how the landlord has selected and trained and onboarded and coached a front desk person or even a security guard, how that would then trickle into if I was a tenant in that building, like right. That, all of that, you're right, that all of that can kind of foreshadow how that landlord operates in general. Like not always, but it could be signaling.
Not always, exactly. You could have a bad day. But exactly, it's the little things that you should pick up on, and certainly having toured I don't know how many buildings and been through how many, there's generally a correlation. For instance, there's an owner who I'm happy to shout out, Jack Resnick and Sons. Most of their folks that work downstairs are ex-police, and they are on it. They are professional. They keep the building in good shape. They keep the traffic going, and it's great. And it's something that tenants appreciate. And yeah, I mean, I could go on, but like, for instance, if you have a lot of volume of patients and you have a doorman, hey, can we provide our patient list to the doorman the day before so that our patients don't have to sit there and wait 5 minutes for them to log their name into the computer? The name is already in there. It's ID, boom, you're up. Those are little things that you should definitely be paying attention to as a healthcare tenant.
That's awesome. If you guys are listening on iTunes or Spotify, you should jump over to the Dave Kittle Show on YouTube because Elliot's showing a little bit of his background out the window. Now, it is a little overcast in New York City, so it's a great view. It's not necessarily a great view today, but we'll wrap it up for here, Elliot. What's a good place for the audience to reach out to you, whether it's your website, email address, LinkedIn, phone number, whatever you want to provide? We'll make sure that my podcast editor, Nate, puts it in the show notes. But what's a good place for the audience to reach out to you? And also, are you in other metros, or is it New York City only?
So we are focused in New York City. We make it a real point to do that. We do partner with other brokerages in other markets, and we're doing that right now, for instance, in Connecticut. But we're really, really take a lot of pride in our expertise in Manhattan, in the 5 boroughs, in Westchester, and Long Island. Yeah, you can reach us at dennishealthcare.com, or you can always call. Call is best, like I said, sort of old school, 646-300-3392. Or, you can always reach me on email, ELLIOT at dennishealthcare.com. That's Elliot at dennishealthcare.com. And we take a lot of pride in being very quick to respond to any and all inquiries and sort of make that part of our value proposition at all. But yeah, really appreciate you having me on. It's been great to connect with you. And, I'm excited about what you guys do. Like I said, when we first connected, and I obviously believe in specialties, and you've got a really, really good one. So, great to chat today. And, I'm sure we'll be in touch. Maybe I'll be in touch with you more than you'd like, but I'll continue to be sending you all the information that I get on the physical therapy front because, I've beaten a dead horse, but I will give you the information. I promise you that. And it keeps coming in.
No, it's all good because I block most cold emails. But like I said, 2 cold emails from you. I replied. It was excellent, perfectly written, genuine, and also helpful. It's helpful. I get your information, the leverage, your experience, all that. So, and then we don't have to pay for it. Then the landlord pays for it. So it's like, why not?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a win-win. And yeah, to your point, I don't know what's going on in New York City, but it's like Seattle lately. It rains like every day and every weekend. So we got to work on that, but I don't think we can control that.
Awesome. Well, everyone, if you find this insightful, helpful, valuable, share it with a friend, share it with a colleague, subscribe to the Dave Kittle Show on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. We'll catch you next time here on the show. Elliot, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Dave Kittle. Are you a healthcare business owner or physical therapy practice owner who is looking to figure out your succession plan or exit strategy? we might be able to help. And in fact, we may be interested in acquiring your practice. If you're interested, you can reach out to me. Shoot me an email at dave@conciergepainrelief.com. That's DAVE at CONCIERGE painrelief.com. Or you can call me at any time, 646-781-8884.